This video will be narrated, but the important stuff will have text overlays for those who are not in a place where they can listen to a video. The smoke that comes off while soldering is not typically considered dangerous, but the solder itself certainly can be. Do not eat anything while soldering, and wash your hands when you are done to help prevent ingesting lead. Soldering irons are also hot. Try not to touch them or drop them in your lap. It is also advisable to never hand a hot iron directly to somebody. It is better to place the iron back in the stand and have the other person pick it up from there. If flux is available, use it liberally, as it will help clean the joint, and solder will flow much easier and create cleaner joints. The area marked practice is non-functional to the circuit. Your first solder attempts should be made here. To clean, simply wipe the tip off with a moistened sponge, or stab at the brass pad a few times. First, if you have flux, add flux to all of the through holes. Remove a THT resistor and bend it like shown. Insert the resistor and spread the legs a small amount to keep the component from falling out. Apply heat to one side of the pad, wait a second, and add solder. Remember this for all of your joints. Heat, solder, solder, heat. Add heat, add solder. Remove solder, remove heat. A good joint should completely cover the pad and look like a shiny Hershey's Kiss. Note, if using lead-free solder, the surface finish may look more of a dull gray. It is all right if a little bit of solder makes it to the other side of the PCB. Cut the legs off and start on the next resistor. As soon as you are comfortable, go ahead and do an entire row at a time. Add flux to the SMD resistor area. For SMD soldering, add a small amount of solder to one pad. Using a set of tweezers or a fingernail, hold the component in place while you reheat the first pad. Note, be careful, as this is not going to be a strong joint yet. Add solder to the other side of the component. Now go back and add solder to the first side. Now, the LEDs can be a bit tricky. These are polarized components. This means they will only work when facing one direction. Note that these components have a small indicator showing polarity. Solder these LEDs the same way you soldered the resistors. Now it is time for the ICs. Like the LEDs, these ICs are polarized. Polarized ICs will have either a line or a dot indicating polarity. Place a small amount of solder on one corner pad. Align the IC with the pads and reheat the first pad. Realign the IC if needed, and solder the opposite corner. You can either solder the pins one at a time or drag solder. If you have a solder bridge, a blob of solder connecting multiple pins, try dragging off solder with your iron and wiping it on the sponge, or use solder wick. A note on solder wick: use flux before using the wick. Also, keep plenty of distance between your fingers and where the wick touches the copper, as the heat will travel up the wick quickly. Solder the remaining resistors and capacitors in place. Test the badge by holding the batteries in place with the battery holders. Note that the textured side of the battery should be touching the board. If all of the LEDs light up, then you are ready to solder the battery holders. Note, these will take a little while to heat up enough to accept the solder. Apply the pin on the back by adding flux and applying a lot of heat to the pin. Test the middle hole on occasion to see if it is hot enough to melt solder. If it is, then feed solder into the hole and it will spread on its own under the pin. This badge was created by Casey. Feel free to look him up or contact him on Twitter. The design files can also be found on GitHub at this address. This has been narrated by Ellie Bean.